From Nutrien Ag Solutions, I'm Senior Meteorologist Andrew Pritchard with your Canadian Prairie weather story for Wednesday, October 23rd, 2024. We've got another dry week to talk about here. Some storm systems passing through the region, otherwise really coming up short as far as producing meaningful precipitation across the region. We do have the chance to talk about some snow north of the Prairie here as we get into next week. And then we'll be watching those temperature swings, but mild overall. So some shots of cooler air, but no real bitterly cold air off to the north to bring into the region. So still trending a little mild compared to average for late October, early November with those temperature swings over the next 7 to 10 days. Now, we did just have a front sweep through. We're a little bit cooler now. Temperatures near or a few degrees below freezing in most corners of the Prairie. Some milder air starting to build in on the backside there. Already a couple degrees above freezing, from Peace River over toward the Edmonton area. Some pockets of colder air, though, especially in some of our lower-lying areas across the Prairie. Now, the precipitation pattern, pretty quiet. We look at the radar here Wednesday morning, just some very light shower activity, maybe some light flurries from Peace River over toward north of Edmonton, but really inconsequential precipitation here, and that's going to be the theme over the next 7 days. We look at the European AI forecast system. Again, our active corridors here from the Pacific, we're bringing in some, strong flow, some onshore flow with that Pacific moisture, but a lot of that is wrung out as it comes up over the top of the mountains. So coastal and higher elevation areas of British Columbia, seeing some heavy precipitation over the next 7 to 10 days. The moisture is squeezed out. Those storm systems then track across the Prairie, bringing windy conditions, temperature swings, but they're really moisture starved, so we don't end up with much in the way of meaningful precipitation as these systems pass through. So this is the next 7 days. This is the next 2 weeks. So this takes us all the way through the first week of September. We're going to start to bring some precipitation into parts of the Corn Belt, parts of the Midwest U.S. that badly need it. But these storms kind of whiff as far as the Prairie goes. So there's a slight chance we could see some, patchy corridors of some heavier precipitation as we get into, the last days of October, early November, but not a real strong signal for widespread meaningful precipitation. Really, we just are not in the right spot with this pattern, or you could say the pattern is not really aligned right for us here in the Prairie to bring in meaningful precipitation. I keep saying that over and over, but it's a relatively active pattern across North America, but it is not one that brings meaningful, measurable precipitation to the Canadian Prairie. We'll look at this in another way, the 15-day precipitation forecast anomaly. So your departure from average, you see that brown shading across the Prairie down into the northern plains of the U.S., the upper Midwest of the U.S., all the way from Alberta down to Minnesota and South Dakota. It's a dry pattern over the next 2 weeks. The reason for that will animate the 500 millibar height patterns here. And again, you see some variety here. It's not as if the whole next 2 weeks keep the same thing going. But as we watch these systems kind of dip into the western and southern U.S., let's kind of just freeze it. This is early next week, Monday, Tuesday. This is a decent alignment for a good storm track or a good storm system to lift into the Prairie. This is when we see that chance for some snow, likely north of the Prairie here. But this is kind of the only time that we slip into that favorable pattern. It's right here as we could see that storm kind of, maybe get some precipitation impacts from this one early next week. But what happens then is this trough breaks off. It kind of cuts itself off down across the southwest U.S. This is as we get into, this is right around October 31st. So the end of October, the beginning of November. So now these storms, these next lows, you watch this one track out of the Gulf of Alaska, they're diving from northwest to southeast across Western Canada. So here comes this one early next week. You see some ridging kind of build back in. Here comes another area of low pressure, another upper level trough that's going to come in from the, the Gulf of Alaska, northern British Columbia. It dives from northwest to southeast across the Prairie. See some ridging build back in. And then I think we get one more that dives in here. Yep. This is November 4th and 5th. Here comes another one diving out of the Gulf of Alaska, coming in from northwest to southeast across the Prairie. This brings us that, look, ridging building back in on the backside. As this pattern repeats, we get temperature swings, we get shots of cooler air. I'll show you here in a moment, there's no bitterly cold air in our source region up here. So we get shots of cooler air, an area of low pressure traverses the region, bringing gusty winds at times, temperature roller coaster, but it's the wrong look to get, moisture drawn northward from the Gulf of Mexico. And of course, we're extremely dry across all this land from the Gulf Coast to the Canadian border. So just, it's not the right pattern for heavy moisture across the Prairie, across the northern plains, across the upper Midwest, the Great Lakes. It's just not the right pattern for late October, early November for meaningful precipitation. So this is what we have the next 3.5 days. I'll animate this, the NAM model precipitation type forecast. Again, looking at some very light showers, maybe some very light snow flurries over the next 24 to 48 hours, but it does not amount to much. This is the next 4 days total precipitation. Again, we're talking about, a few millimeters here. If we see flurries, not looking at accumulating snow. If we see some showers here, not looking at something that's going to really soak the top layer of the soil there. So now we can put this all together with the precipitation type forecast over the next 2 weeks from the European model. Again, looking at some very light shower activity possible here as we end the week. Nothing really meaningful. A quiet weekend with high pressure across the region. The next area of low pressure begins to eject over the back half of the weekend, early next week. This is what I showed you, Monday, Tuesday. This is kind of that brief time frame where the pattern is somewhat favorable for precipitation, for generating a storm system that's going to drop some precip across the prairie, but it struggles still all the same. You see this area of snow kind of wrap up on the north side of this storm system. This is when I said maybe the chance for some snow north of the prairie. This is one that maybe could clip you there in Edmonton, but primarily areas north of Highway 16, getting in on the snow with that one next Monday. Of course, the specifics with that one to be determined, but you kind of see, this is as good as it gets. Next Monday, Tuesday, before we get into that pattern I showed you where storms are going to be diving from Alaska, from the Gulf of Alaska, down from the northwest to the southeast across the prairie. And this is really just, a classic pattern for rain shadowing the prairie. So we get a lot of coastal flow, a lot of coastal moisture here, heavy snow, all the way from British Columbia up to, the Northwest Territories, parts of southern Alaska getting in on some of that precipitation. But as the area of low pressure dives across the prairie, it's starved for moisture, and we just don't get any. So here's the chance of snow. Looking out over the next 7 days, a lot of this again on that Monday storm system, Monday, Tuesday, early next week, north of Highway 16, your best chance for some accumulating snow with this one. Edmonton, maybe can't rule it out. Saskatoon, maybe can't rule it out, the chance we get some snow here early next week. The probability, though, of picking up 3 inches or more of snow over the next 10 days, really not registering across the prairie. So certainly the chances for some flurries, but still looking for that first signal for really meaningful precipitation across the prairie. One more way to look at it, European ensemble model, total precipitation over the next 15 days, just kind of smoothed out. This really kind of illustrates the picture here. If we do get some precipitation from any one of these systems, it's going to be light. We're talking about, less than 5 millimeters of total precip over the next 2 weeks. Now, those temperatures, again, will continue to do that roller coaster ride with each area of low pressure that dives across the region. Even if it's not bringing meaningful precipitation, we're going to see a surge of warmer air on the leading edge of that system with southerly flow. And then as the area of low pressure passes through the prairie, we get that northerly wind burst on the backside, bringing in some cooler temperatures. Now, I mentioned as we look off toward our source region, with storm systems diving out of Alaska, bringing, shots of cooler air, we want to look up there to see how cold is that air. They are not really building any sort of reservoir of deeply cold air there. So we do bring some in at times, but that warmth just kind of rebuilds. So that is the pattern. That is the theme as we head into the first week of November. Temperature, swings at times, but not bringing in any sharply deep cold air, at least over the next 2 weeks. So you see the variety there. High temperature of 8 the next couple of days, back up to the middle teens for the weekend in Calgary before another shot of colder air comes in for next week. Edmonton, very similar look. A lot of folks enjoying a warmer weekend with cooler temperatures here to finish up this week, and then cooler temperatures to start off next week.